So much for all of that. And joining me now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so very much for being with us. We wanted to talk to you about the surveillance programs. The Senate has now voted for cloture overwhelmingly to stop the debate, stop the filibuster or the blocking of a floor debate and floor vote, we should say, on either accepting the House version of the USA Freedom Act or adding on amendments, as is now contemplated, which would mean coming back to the House, and amendments that might not make it get through the House side. So we're still blocked here. How serious is the lack of surveillance since this law expired Sunday night?
Well, it's very mixed. I mean, clearly it's not ideal. These authorities have lapsed, that we don't have something that we put in their place to reform the authorities like USA Freedom. That obviously is the optimal outcome, because we can most quickly provide these important reforms and also not go blind. There are workarounds, though, that if I'm sure there were investigations necessary, the administration will look at other authorities that they can use. But they'll be imperfect workarounds, because the standards may be higher in terms of the burden of proof in a court. It may not apply in all circumstances, because there may be specific requirements of, for example, criminal law statutes that don't work as well in the intelligence context or terrorism. So there are ways to work around this, but they're not perfect. They often take longer, and in some cases, there just may not be an adequate workaround.
Do we know anything more about what happened in Boston, this possible lone wolf, or is this still clearly under investigation?
Well, we still don't know, and in terms of the threats that have been made recently to aircraft, that's something that obviously we're looking into. It may be, as we have seen in the past, simply a domestic party that gets some kind of a perverse kick out of making these hoax threats, or someone overseas doing the same. At the same time, we do see indications that ISIS recognizes the disruptive impact of putting false information out there, that when they post something on social media or they call in threats or make some other kind of a provocative hoax, that it distracts our law enforcement intelligence personnel. So we're still trying to get to the bottom of this, but there are a number of possibilities.
What do you say, Congressman, when you get back to the USA Freedom Act, what do you say to those who say that they still think this is too intrusive, that too much privacy is given up, even though the telephone records are already kept by the telephone companies?
I think we've drawn a pretty good balance here, and it's reflective in the fact that the overwhelming majority of both Democrats and Republicans, as well as stakeholders from left to right and center, have embraced this. It gives us still the capabilities that we need in an emergency to determine whether a number is connected to a plot, but it's more protective of privacy, because it doesn't keep the government in the business of gathering bulk data on millions of Americans that have no connection with terror. So I think it's the right balance, and I think we see that in the overwhelming support it has in the House, and I think in the Senate, if the Senate leadership will get out of the way.
Speaking of Senate leadership, and you had Mitch McConnell pushing it to the end and clearly misfiring there, and then you had Paul, who actually went to the floor. He later sort of tried to walk it back, but he went to the floor on Sunday and suggested that some of his colleagues might be happy if there were a terror attack, because then they could blame him. What do we make of this kind of debate in the Senate?
Well, it's obviously gotten very ugly, and I think Rand Paul probably regrets having ever said that. Nonetheless, it's very unseemly, to put it mildly, to have a member of the Senate basically fundraising off an issue on the Senate floor that is obstructing resolution of the problem and inhibiting the intelligence community from having the tools it needs to protect the country. So very unseemly, to put it mildly, and I think more than that, very disruptive of a national security tool. So hopefully this will come to an end soon. And I do want to caution, as you pointed out, Andrea, if the Senate loads up USA Freedom with these 4 amendments, there's a very good chance it may go down in the House, and then we just have a prolonged period of lapse in these authorities. So I hope the senators will realize that these 4 amendments, frankly, aren't necessary. They're not desirable. They don't improve the bill. The intelligence community doesn't want them, and it's only going to create further problems for progress in this area and with this impasse.
And, Congressman, how concerned are you about the TSA's failure in 95% of the instances to spot weapons or other contraband explosives that got through on these tests?
Well, without commenting specifically on this report, I could say that, for quite some time I've been making the argument, which I continue today, that our airports and our aircraft are still far too vulnerable, that we really haven't taken all the steps that we need to protect the public. It's one of the key vulnerabilities that I worry about. It's one of the reasons, frankly, that AQAP, as well as this Corson group, is such a concern to those of us in the intelligence community, because these kind of attacks on aircraft have the potential of really changing the country in a very destructive way. In addition to the terrible loss of life, it would cripple an industry, it would result in a severe dislocation of people, and I think that is something to be guarded against, and we plainly have a lot of work to do.
Adam Schiff, thank you on all things. Thanks for being with us today, sir.
Thanks, Andrea.